um, Going on the podcast reminds me I'm like a comedian without the comedy. I've got the material. I've got good material here. Anger and other emotional repression and how it drives suffering. I mean, you could make a complete. You can make movies out of this, sitcoms, documentaries, but nobody's aware of it because it's all buried. Most of our entertainment is not even available to us. Dan and I talk about this all the time. That if we do something like, you're a redneck when, but you're in emotional repression when. The problem is it's just not that fucking funny. It's not as funny as, you're a redneck when you're on a date and you realize it's your sister-in-law. You're sitting there with your partner pissed, but you're smiling. Your emotional repression when. It just doesn't. Yeah, it's not that funny. Or maybe I'm not that funny. In any event, even though I can't string together the words that make me laugh around repression, to me, I laugh all the time. I mean, life is funny. Dan and I have a laugh. Toshi and I. In the midst of the pain, there is comedy. When you see where the pain is coming from and the links we go to not acknowledge where our pain is coming from. The links that we go to. And I can't think of a better area than dating. I often wonder about my audience because, some of us are older. I'm 54, and people have been following my work who are a little bit older than me or my age. And I just wonder what your dating life is like. I sometimes think about that when I talk about, because there's some of us in our older age that are starting to date again. And so I think this is going to be interesting. But some of us are in relationships. We've been in marriages for a long time. And I just think this is really interesting how people hear me talk about something that they may have not done in 20 or 30 years. And then I got the younger crowd, people who, I wish there were more people in their 20s, but plenty of people in their 30s and 40s who are dating. Oh my God, you're my crowd, because I'm a dater. If I'm not in a relationship, I like to date. I like to go out. I like men. And when I'm with a man, I still like men. And I like my man the best. But we have an open sexual relationship, but we do have boundaries around having emotional connection or dating, like in that way. So it's basically just, you're going to fuck or nothing. And maybe not even to that, but it's sexual or nothing with us. But Chester and I got a divorce at one point, came back together. And during the time of the divorce, I was interested and was dating, and it was fascinating. I told Dan, I haven't even had a chance to inquire into certain programs that don't even become active until you start dating. Because I was in a relationship for 16 years with a man who, great person, but I never, because I was so stable, it was just a really stable relationship, financially stable and emotionally pretty stable, but it wasn't really intimate. I mean, it wasn't the kind of relationship that I want, but there was just a lot of, stability. So I never, even though I was having sex on the side, because we could do that, we had an open relationship in this original marriage of mine. We just didn't date. And so I went from that marriage. As soon as that ended, I had met Chester right there. And I actually ended my first marriage by saying, I don't want to be together anymore. And then I went and met Chester. And I was ready. Frankly, I just didn't want to cheat on my husband. I didn't want to do it behind his back. And so I told him that I just wasn't happy in the marriage anymore. And that I wanted to pursue other people. But I didn't have those strong feelings for Chester yet. It was just a sexual thing. And me and my partner had always had sexual interest in different guys. So this felt like it was going to be something new, is what I mean. And what my point in saying this is that I didn't do any dating. between that first marriage and Chester. Because I knew that first marriage, I wanted it to end. And I knew that I had been in a relationship in which I knew I wasn't going to wait around. Because I was ready. I'd been doing a lot of inquiry to leave the last relationship. So when I got to be with Chester, I think I was just really ready. Some people might have said, well, that was kind of short after your divorce. Or yeah. Well, you have to understand, in a relationship, as you guys know, over a 16-year period, because we didn't do inquiry together and there wasn't bonding around certain things and we weren't disconnected, we both repressed anger in different ways. It just didn't work. So it needed to end. And he has a relationship now and he seems happy, and I'm happy for him. And he's actually a really good friend. But I didn't date, okay? So when Chester and I got divorced, I dated. And it was the first time in 28 years. And I got rejected. Yeah. Yeah, that was interesting. Because I'm older now. I got a lot of things that just aren't working for me in the same way. And I don't mean that. I know what you guys are thinking. And I wasn't thinking that when I said that. That doesn't work exactly how I would like to, but it works pretty well. So it's just, I wasn't talking about that. Well, let me back up a little bit here. Because I think that both times that I've kind of been on the dating scene, I've been clear. That's what I want to tell you. I really wasn't on the dating scene when I left my first husband. What I mean by clear is I did a lot of inquiry to leave that relationship and to say some things before I left. And I was ready for Chester in that I had already been doing some repression work. And I was open to dating someone different, to opening up to someone new that was actually more challenging for my nervous system, because he can get angry and those kinds of things. But I was really healthy during the time that in the sense that in this kind of healthy, I still had anger repression, and that's not healthy. But I was healthy in the sense that I can go after what I want. I can do and say mostly what I want. By that time, I just couldn't feel and express anger. But I could ask him out, and it was pretty clear. And I'm sure my energy, he even said, he's like, your energy was like no other's, your confidence. Because a lot of guys approach him. He was younger, in his early 20s, looked like a model, basically. I fell in love with his heart, though, later. Okay, so when Chester and I got divorced, then, I've told that story, and he and I are together right now. But when we got divorced, I went right back into well, first of all, I grieved. I spent weeks in inquiry to make sure that I wouldn't bury any of the grief or loss or anger or fear of what happened in the relationship. And then I was feeling pretty clear, and I'm like, oh, I'm ready to date now. I just wanted to see who's out there. And man, I got rejected. I haven't told this story. The things that I don't have now, it's not what I was saying. It's not my penis. That is fine. What's not working for me is that I can't bury anger as well. So that part of me isn't buried as much, whatever that is. So I could use that to my advantage on the dating scene. You see, because I can show up on a first date pretty peaceful and pretty kind until anger repression work. And then I'm going to show up on the first date just myself, which will be pretty peaceful and kind, frankly, but with just this ability to say things, not mean, but just to be myself, to not, and that was a completely different experience, because I think that not everybody wanted that or wants that on the dating scene. And because I would start to get to, you know me, I was starting to get to some of the hard questions early with people. And I had to check in to see, like, is this coming from fear? Am I just afraid to be hurt again? And the answer was yes, because we all are. And here I am dating for the first time in 20 years, and I've got anger repression still, some layers of it. And when you have repression, you still have this thing in the dating scene like, I gotta have him, I gotta have her. And it's not just love or sex, it's trauma. And that's what I was experiencing for the first time, after divorcing Chester is my trauma that had never had a chance to come up in the last 28 or 30 years came up. And I knew I needed to go for it. So I went on every dating app that you can imagine that has gay people. I've never told this story. This was actually a year and a half ago, not that long ago. I was at the last stages of my anger repression work. I hadn't done my trust work yet. If you know my path, the last layers of anger repression were around trust, trusting of that emotion. I wasn't there yet. So it was just weird. Can I just say that? You guys, I feel like I can speak like freely to you, even though I don't know you, because you do this kind of work. And these people that I was dating, they don't do this fucking kind of work. And I found that out. And this was the first time that I kind of, in a sense, went outside of the spiritual world to see, like, how do people interact out there? And wow. Yeah, I see what you mean now. Because I had been disconnected from the world because of my anger repression. And here I was coming back to being a human and dating. And it's like, oh shit, yeah, it's crazy out here. It's just as crazy out here as it is for the people doing inquiry on their own trauma in here, except that the people out there are acting it out unconsciously and don't know they're doing it. Holy fuck. So I met some doozy experiences on the dating scene, I'll tell you. And, here's me just being really naive, Scott Killaby, 52-year-old, spiritual teacher and a bypass for 20 years. La la land, basically just present moment awareness, but not connected to anger in the body. So and when you're in that state, the world seems, it's not embodied realization. It just isn't. I mean, embodied realization, you don't turn away from the world. That's no such thing, because that's all that there is what you're experiencing. So you'd be turning away from what you're experiencing. It doesn't really make any sense to me in the embodied stage, any kind of trying to get away from any of this, because it's fear. Now, we have to protect ourselves, of course, from certain things for survival, but dating is not one of them for me. But, I fell prey to this is a new thing I did not know about. Call me naive. A hot guy approaches me on the internet. I'm thinking, I've already married a really attractive guy. I'm not bragging. I'm just telling you how naive I was. Because when I got with Chester, there were all kinds of guys who wanted to be with him. And he came with me. So, here I am. I don't have a deficiency story. You can imagine, here I'm dating without a deficiency story. It's weird. Because people are just coming right into my space, obviously trying to get something from me. And I don't even know. Even though I'm clear, I don't know their intentions because they're hiding it. And because they're attractive, I'm like, and my hormones turn on, right? Because I'm just human. And I'm looking at this guy, you're my type, and oh shit, I found you. I want you. And this is fun for me. This isn't suffering yet. See, because I just think I'm meeting somebody, and so naive, because I just had not been on the dating scene. And so, but look, I caught on quickly to what was happening in these scenarios and took my power back, you could say. But at first I was taken by it because I'll just tell you, I still had some layers of repression. And when you have repression, the falling in love thing will kind of easily, or not even falling in love, limerence will trap you in a way that is blinding when you have deficiency stories, or when you have a sense of lack within yourself. And the sense of lack or deficiency comes from the emotional deficiency. We're missing parts of ourselves. So we identify with this false self, and then that's trying to date. And that wasn't with me when I was dating. All that I had was this repression in my body that used to produce identity. The only identities that would get produced every now and then in that dating scene were, I'm not as attractive as him. And okay, but if you were to look at us, you might say, that's true, Scott, because the guy that you're interested in is younger and more attractive than you. A lot of people would have said that, in other words. So this didn't look like a program to me. This just looked like I was attracted to, here's my type so that you know, between the ages of 22 and 35. So late 40s is okay too. This is just my type, physical type and everything. And it depends on what you look like and how you are within that age range. But it's just my type, and I had to come out of repression to know that I want to rob the cradle. I'm just kidding. I just wanted to shock you for a second. No, I don't. I had to go in to make sure that I'm not attracted to children, because that was actually a concern for a while, because I opened up to the fact that I like younger guys. But when I did inquiry, it's like when I went back to 17 and then 16 and they're pimply and they're skinny and like goofy looking faces and boys and girls and just awkward. And then 14 and 15 and no, we don't do that. So I'm okay with that. But with not going there, I mean, with knowing that I don't want to go there. But I have to tell you, I'd already just been with Chester, 22, 23. And then here I am on the internet, and now I'm talking to like a 28-year-old military guy. And I don't care who you are. You can be blinded by looks and hormones. Now, the problem, though, is when you have trauma with it. And I did have the last layers of anger repression. So there was this need to connect with somebody that was coming from the repression. And I actually noticed, I have been watching other teachers going through a similar thing where they come to the end of a relationship and, well, some of them will even cheat on the spouse. I came very close. I went and everything was up front before I ever met Chester. And I said to my husband, this is how I feel, and I want to leave the relationship. But it came close to cheating. Luckily I had enough inquiry to be emotionally honest about what was going on for me, but it still hurt like hell for my ex-husband. But I've watched other teachers who they didn't, because they too had something unprocessed, and it's too difficult for them to go to their wife and say, and they don't even know that the reason that they're really interested in this woman is because of something really unprocessed. I mean, attraction and hormones, they are what they are, and we all have them, even us teachers, of course. But there's something else here going on, and that's the unprocessed stuff. So when I have a lot of compassion for the teachers who cheat on their wife. I have more compassion for their wives. But I have compassion for them too, because I don't think that they recognize that that's unprocessed stuff. When your needs don't get met as a child, like mine didn't, and then you're in a relationship and your needs are not getting met and you don't express it. I expressed it in my first marriage, but I also decided that my needs were not going to get met there. And I said that. But if you repress anger, that's hard to say to somebody. To say, I don't have the feelings that I had. My needs aren't being met here. It could be me, but I'm not happy, and whatever you have to say. But a lot of people might think that, cheating or things like that doesn't have anything to do with trauma, but it's the deceptive part that does. No judgments, but it just is. And it's just safer not to feel and express what we have to actually feel and express to leave a relationship cleanly. But the reason I'm bringing that up is not so much for the cheating thing, but because of the energy that I felt was still needing to connect because of my repression. And I wondered if these other teachers had this sort of almost like a need to connect coming from trauma. Because what else would make them, lie to their wives if they did? It's all alleged. But you see what I mean? It's something to think about in our own lives. But the need to connect was there for me. And so I want to be transparent about this, even if they don't. The need to connect came up for me as I went back on the dating scene, and it was just skewing things because, need to connect, the energy around that. I've been doing 4 or 5 years. It was at the end of repression work, and the need had never had a chance to come out because I'd always been in relationships I was connected to men for a long time. So then when that connection wasn't there in, human form, human relationship, it just seemed like there's this need to have that. And I didn't know that was there. And I understood it so much better because all my life I had disconnected from people. My whole trauma was I have to stay away from people and then find that one guy and connect with him. And then I found that guy and I connected in relationships with one guy. And that helped and satisfied this deep disconnection in me that I just didn't know was really there. Because when you're in a relationship, it just covers it up a little bit, at least. And so when that relationship ended, there's this need to connect that got exposed for the first time, coming from anger repression. And I just feel like that could be what drives us teachers. If you ever wonder, it's not just a need to connect coming from trauma, but an inability to be authentic around it, to say and feel what we need to say and feel, to get through something cleaner. Yeah, I know that feeling because that's repression. So I allowed these guys to come in, when I was dating, and I would see, okay, he's manipulating me. He's trying to get money. He talked to me for 2 or 3 weeks saying all the right things, but we don't get on camera. And I'm catching on to the catfish within a week and a half into it. And I keep saying, let's go into video, and he won't. And then he asks for money. And then there's this feeling of an old feeling, I just got taken advantage of, I'm a fool. But that was just helping me come out of anger repression because I said, God damn it, get the fuck away from me and don't ever do that again. And if I could report you to whatever, dating ad that you're on, I would, so that you don't do this to other people. And I said that to a couple people who tried to do that to me, and I just set that boundary. It was really empowering. And I realized that if I would have just felt like the fool who got rejected or hurt, I wouldn't have found my power. And so it's just nice to be on the dating scene. I have this power now. I don't have to just be a victim of whatever. Well, the thing I really want to talk about, though, is how when we find somebody, or we think we found somebody, what is that, right? Can we talk about that? That feeling of you are it for me. But when I met Chester, it was like, you are it. You are the one. But I don't really believe in soulmates or the twin flame thing. I don't know anything about that. I'm not talking about it. I'm just saying, I looked at him and I thought I knew him from a past life or that he was family. And then I also was very attracted to him. And then when I met him, you know how it is. Everybody else in the world goes, you don't even see them in terms, you just see him. Or you see her, whoever you see. Pull them up right now. Feel how that feels to have that person in your life. If you're in the beginning stages of something, it's so sweet. And it's okay. To me, it's totally innocent, because some people in the spiritual path, they'll make an enemy out of falling in love or limerence. I think it's a huge mistake, because so much of our trauma is in that if we just turn away from it or try to deconstruct our feelings or extinguish our desires, we just stay in trauma. Or if we just rest and meditate through something like that and not really connect with another human being and put ourselves out there, and we let spirituality disconnect us like that. But what if you go full on into it and never use spirituality to try to get rid of anything that's happening while you're on the dating scene or even falling in love? Literally try not to get rid of anything. but instead making everything that's unconscious conscious that's driving the suffering. I mean, how else is there any other way to live if the unconsciousness is driving us during our limerence or our falling in love? And if we know that it's driving us, why wouldn't we use that? Well, truthfully, can we just be honest here? Do you want to do inquiry when you're in love on what's driving that? Okay, anybody who actually does this, please comment. I don't know that there'll be that many comments. Well, just let me know what you think about that. In other words, when you're in love with somebody and there isn't a lot of pain yet, you're just in love and there's limerence or something, or there's just limerence first, a crush, and it's not bad. You don't see anything bad about them yet, none of that. Are you going to go to the unconscious that drives that? Is that what you do? I just don't meet those people. And let me tell you who I do meet. I meet myself. Is that when things start to get bad, that's when we're going to bring inquiry in. But because the projections are all coming from trauma, it's going to get bad. Not right away. Let's talk about what happens. I think, this is just my perspective, my words. You might have different words and a different experience. But for me, as long as there's a deficiency story, which means as long as there's repression, there's going to be this kind of blinding, the attraction will be blinded emotionally in some ways because we have to stay safe and get love with repression. So we're not going to be in that limerence showing who we really are. So there's a falsity to it already. We're already entering a relationship in which they don't know us and we don't know them. And so all the projections and trauma can come out there. And in the beginning, it can be a lot of positive stuff. Like when I first met Chester, his big energy was attractive. He just comes into a room, he has big energy. And as an anger repressor, I was kind of smaller and quieter. There was nothing in me that wanted to inquire into his big energy or how I liked it. Nothing. Until it got bad. Now, how did it get bad? That big energy turns to anger. Because the fact that he has big energy, if I would have known my own self more, my embodied self, I would have known that his big energy comes from the repression of vulnerable emotions. So I'll tell you what, that was also kind of attractive because I'd been in the spiritual world and there'd been so many people who are just so vulnerable, but it doesn't seem real. So I was kind of tired of fake vulnerability, and I was doing that anyway, hiding from anger. I just saw a lot of that in the spiritual world, in other words. You know, the fake kindness and just love and light and peace and holding space for each other. I mean, you know, that just doesn't go with fucking. Sometimes I just want to fuck, and I don't want to just like, I want full shades, full spectrum. But I didn't see in the beginning that he couldn't give me full spectrum. He couldn't give me vulnerability, which is okay with me in the beginning because I was so tired of fake vulnerability. So I thought, well, that's good. I'm tired of the fake, like the spiritual thing that's obviously a bypass. At least he is not doing that. And then he has the big energy. But the anger, whew. And, you know, when you start to see more of who someone is, the image or whatever brought you into that limerence changes. And you see them differently, starting to get to know them. And then he's starting to get to know me because he knows that I can't get angry now. I don't. In the beginning. Well, so we can also just talk about how we feel about ourselves. Let's go into a little bit of practice. If you're dating, if you pull that person up that you really, really like, or that you fell in love with a couple weeks ago or months ago, or just think back. Look at you in that memory. What deficiency story do you have right there on that first date or on those first messages to each other. Who is that? Who are you in this relationship? What deficiency story comes up, if any, for you? And if I were you, I would just write that down. If it's more than one, write it down. What identity? Like, I'm not good enough. I'm unlovable. Okay, so you've got that. That's really important, because that identity is the saboteur, you could say, of the relationship. But the sabotage itself is coming from the repression below it. It's just that the identity, as long as you feel that way, some things are going to happen probably in the relationship, which would be, you're going to get triggered. You have to, in some way, get triggered if you have repression, because you can't feel and express your authentic self. So that's one thing we just have to understand. With a limerence or falling in love, there have to be triggers later, because we fell in love under the circumstances that we are not showing each other who we really are. So the trigger is going to come as we misunderstand and we get to know each other, and we see certain parts in the other that we may not like so much, and we start expressing it or shutting down around it and not expressing it. And then that creates the triggers. So it's a setup. And that's why so many people fall in love and feel so good, but then it ends up being kind of bad or even toxic at times. Because if you don't use your relationship as a vehicle to wake up and embody presence, then it's a vehicle for suffering. Because look what's happening. We meet under circumstances in which we absolutely do not know who each other is. We do not know. We have to face that fact. Even if we keep doing it, we ought to face that fact just to be more conscious. Nobody knows anybody in the beginning. Nobody knows anybody in the beginning. And that's when we have all those feelings. See? We have all these feelings at a time when we do not and cannot be authentic with each other. If we have trauma, we can't. So unless you're going into a dating scene where you're saying, okay, this is my anger, this is the stuff that pisses me off. If you do this, this will probably irritate me. I get hurt, but I don't always share it when this happens. You know, like if somebody starts sharing that, it destroys the image. It's hard to fall in love. It can be for somebody who doesn't want that authenticity, who doesn't want to be that real. I mean, who wants to have that conversation on the first date when you can talk about everything you have in common and just sit there and adore each other and flirt? Why would you want to say, my mom hurt me and I might see you as my mom every day, and I'll think that you're hurting me when you're not, and I'll probably get really angry from time to time. So do you want to go get some donuts now, babe? It's just not a conversation that people have. Sometimes they do. I know that there are people out there listening right now who'll say, no. When I go on dates, this is what I talk about. Bravo to you for that, because that's so rare that I don't even meet people like that, actually. I put up a kind of a joke dating profile app on Facebook that was this pretty woman or girl, and she was basically saying, here I am, I'm available, I have unprocessed stuff. I want you to love me, but hurt me at the same time. It wasn't in those words, but it's like, love me so you can hurt me. And then I can blame everything on you and not take any responsibility. And that to me is pretty honest. Because that's what happened with me and Chester. I fell, but I still had repression of anger. Why does that matter? Because that was, I invited that suffering. I invited that unconsciously. The suffering that happened later. Why would I want to say it that way? Because some people would say, well, that's like blaming someone. No, it's not. It's totally empowering when you see it. See, I didn't want to be myself. That's not why I was on the dating scene. That's not why I set up dating profiles, was to be my authentic self. I did that to find somebody right? So when you have repression and you're trying to find somebody, it's not about being your authentic self. If you have repression and trauma, what's it about? Staying safe and getting love. Getting love. Not being love, getting it. But see, if I don't bury emotions, I know that the other person cannot give me love. If I've done my work and I allowed everything and I love myself by allowing everything, then I know that the person can't give me that. So what is happening in a relationship if I know that someone can't give me that? Well, it's definitely a different relationship. It's more conscious. It's profoundly beautiful, or can be, and profoundly much more heart connected, way more heart connected than the trauma bonds. But it looks different. Because as I cleared that need to connect that was coming from anger repression on the dating scene, and I was really being myself after a while, much more on profiles actually, and when I would talk to people, I would just tell them what's important to me up front. I started to do that. And what it did is it disconnected me from some people who were not right for me. Because when you start being honest, it just scares some people. And if they went, it'd be like, holy shit, he's hot. But oh well. Because I don't know him yet. He's leaving because something that I shared was too much. And that's too bad. But no matter how hot you are or what the possibility was, if just me being myself a little bit up front here is going to scare you away, you're doing me a favor and you by walking away. Well, I was dating, but, Chester and I actually just ended up getting back together because when I started to be more authentic on the dating scene, I just realized I know what I want. And with Chester, I can express that, and he knows that, and he knows how important that is for me. And he was doing a lot of work on his own at the same time, right? So he was just showing up differently. So we got back together. And that's part of that story, of course, the dating story. But before we got back together, I just wanted to share this with you, is that I actually started showing up on the dating scene differently after clearing that. It had to come up first. I need to connect trauma. Coming from the disconnection in our bodies, we're disconnected from anger or sadness or hurt. So we feel disconnected from our bodies. We just feel disconnected from people. So when we have an attraction, there's also this, the trauma there. Plus, if we have trauma, we can't really trust ourselves. If we're on a date or meeting somebody, we can't trust ourselves to I'm going to be myself here. We can't trust that. And so there's even a distrust of other people, which gets in the way. But see, the more that we are ourselves, the more empowered we are in dating. Even if we lose opportunities, because some of those opportunities need to be lost. Through our authenticity, we need to not get with those people when we're conscious. More conscious, right? So by doing this work, you could show up on the dating scene more conscious, but it's not going to be necessarily like the girl who says, love me, now hurt me. I want you to love me, but I really want you to hurt me. I mean, you might say that if you know that to be true. I didn't say it that way, though. The conversations that I would have when I started to become interested in people is I would just start asking them about them. As a teacher, I don't want to tell them. I'm not going to teach them. That's disgusting, by the way. I think it's just fear. That's not real. I have no business teaching anybody when I'm dating them, and I've learned that, or if I'm married to them. But I can actually be human, and I can say, tell me about your parents, and there I get everything I need to hear. Because if that person is disconnected from mom and dad, that person is going to be living a life of trauma with me. And when I mean disconnected, I don't mean that they don't talk to them. It's not about that. It's an emotional disconnection. It has nothing to do. See, I noticed I was dating some men who visited their parents quite often, but were disconnected from them. and were just totally inauthentic with their parents and had triggers around their parents. And so I knew that, well, you're going to put that on me. And that's fine, but I get to learn that early. And that goes into the decision in my system about whether this is the right thing for me. And sometimes I would learn really cool things like, yeah, I had a good relationship with my dad actually, but he died when I was 16. And since then, my uncle has been just learn these things about people. It's really a beautiful thing if you can become a little bit more personal early on, because what I noticed is that it was really connecting me more with these guys. But they just couldn't give so much. They couldn't give as much as Chester can give in that way. He does have to process to be able to give, of course, on the vulnerability, because he represses that. But it's there eventually after the anger. I don't know. Getting back with Chester, in a sense, kind of robbed me of the opportunity to see how much of my trauma would be there on the dating scene if I wasn't with somebody. But I feel like I got to a place during that period of time where I did enough dating to know that when I got back with Chester, I was doing it at that time for the right reasons. It was a different time, different circumstances. I was sharing, I'm going to share this last story with you. I was sharing all of this stuff with a friend who does this work. And she was saying, well, she does the work, and a sadness repressor. So she was hurt by her dad, not really leaving physically, but being the kind of dad that comes in and out of your life. And so, when he's in your life, it's like you're everything, the way that he looks at you. And this is her life. But then he would leave mad at mom and wouldn't talk to the kids for periods of time. And this is real abandonment that this girl felt. But she had no idea in her adult life that her clammy skin and her panic and her self-defeating self-talk was because of that issue with dad. And she just had never opened up to the hurt. And so she repressed the hurt of feeling like dad just keeps abandoning me. He would do it every month. He would just leave and then come back. So as she would get ready for a date, like a first date, she'd be panicking. And she wouldn't know why. And she tried mindfulness and, of course, medication and different things to settle her nerves, but she just wasn't getting to the root of it. Because see how it fools us. She thought she had an anxiety issue, like just fear. And she did, but it was a fear of feeling and expressing hurt or opening to that part of herself. So here she was going on dates, but she couldn't open to that part of her. So without that authentic self online, she was suffering. And she couldn't open that to that at first with these men. So these dates never went anywhere because her fear took her out, sabotaged it. But once she started opening to the hurt really deeply in this work, she started showing up differently on the dating apps and how she would talk to people. She was more empowered to see, like, is this what I want? Because if she was in fear for so long that she couldn't really know what she wanted. But now that she could feel and express what was real for her, she would look at some of these men and say, you know what? I don't want to be with them, but it's not because I'm afraid. It's because I want something better for myself now. I know my authentic self and I can say no here. I don't have to just trauma bond with the next guy who's somewhat attractive who likes me. And then maybe if we live it that way, we'll find the one that works for us. It might not be perfect. It might not be a soulmate, but the one that helps us become more conscious, but also someone who will be there for us too. Because with trauma, we often pick people, we create our suffering. So we get into relationships with people who are already disconnected from people or they're already clinging because of their trauma, or we are. There's so much for us here to keep talking about, and all the phases that we go through after the initial falling in love stage, and how that unfolds. And the more that you hold your authentic self back through a relationship, the more you just invite suffering. And you're doing it. And often when we're doing it, we're looking at our partner like they're the ones doing it, because we can't look and feel into what's buried here. So that's a setup. See that? And as long as we do that with each other in relationship, we're going to suffer. And we're probably going to blame our partner for it, shadow it out, at least some. But we're going to suffer. So I guess what I'm saying is, if you don't want to suffer in dating and in relationship, go to the repression work. Be your authentic self. Super empowering, guys, in relationship and dating. Super empowering. It's actually what you're looking for. You're just looking for yourself. Once you find yourself, what the role that other people play in your life is different. You're not going to them for love and approval to stay safe anymore. So you can actually love people when you go deep here. Like really, really authentically be love in the world and in your relationships. But if you don't feel that right now, do the work, because that's what you are. You just don't know it yet. Thank you for listening.